Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Coach's Corner. I'm Jeffrey David Hartford, your host and the coach, the conduit of optimism, altruism, consciousness, and health. And today I am so fortunate to bring to you my guest, Dr. Thomas Seager, professor at Arizona State University and co-founder of Morosco Forge Ice Bath. And man, we're going to get into a lot of wonderful things today. So Dr. Seager, welcome. And I'll have you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what brings you here.
Thanks for having me on. What brings me here is the science of cold plunge therapy. I'm trained as an engineer. My thing used to be the environment and infrastructure and sustainability. And I went through a period where I separated from my wife. We got divorced. My health had gone to hell. I was about 250 pounds. And I said, well, if I'm going to start dating again, I got to really get in better shape. I lost a lot of weight. I got down below 200, which was great. But when I got my blood panel done, it said I had an elevated prostate-specific antigen, so PSA. Now, this happens to a lot of guys who I was 52 at the time, and it scared the crap out of me. So, I go online like everybody does, and by the time you're done reading WebMD, you're pretty sure you're going to die. Because all that catastrophic thinking is going on through my head. And I started talking to other men. Instead of going to, a urologist like you're supposed to do, I was calling up my friends and I was saying, the funny thing happened to me. Have you ever had your PSA checked? And all these stories started coming out. Men don't talk about this anywhere near enough. One guy, biopsies, sepsis infection. Another guy, biopsies of the 16 samples, 4 of them were positive, but the false positive rate is really high, but he had his prostate removed anyway. Like, they were all just horror stories to me. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do ice baths instead. And that's when I got really serious. I brought my PSA from 7 down to 1.1. And this was just ketogenic diet, ice baths every day, because that's good for inflammation. And I started reading more about ice baths and cancer. I got my blood work done again. My testosterone went through the roof, 1180 nanograms per deciliter. So I started reading about ice baths and testosterone. And I changed my whole career. I had a lot of help doing it, though, Jeffrey. The lockdowns, they locked me out of my classroom. Now I'm teaching engineering courses on Zoom. People came after me on Twitter, tried to cancel me because I was very anti-lockdown. I'm saying these are useless. Masks don't do any good. This whole social distancing is a bunch of crap. It's overblown. It's all propaganda. And of course, I became, the world's most notorious COVID-denying professor, and I lost a lot of friends. But in the aftermath of that, we as a country are left with this incredible mental health crisis, where it's metabolic health, it's mental health, it's physiological health. Life expectancy has cratered in the United States. And so now, instead of being about clean air and clean water and infrastructure, I'm about health. I'm about empowering people to do it for themselves, because what has been stolen from us is this knowledge that your body can heal itself. We have been beaten into some kind of propaganda submission, where now people think the question is, what drug should I take? And that's just the wrong question. Once you get, locked into that pharmacological paradigm, you say, should I take this one or these 3? Then you've already lost. The right question is, what does my body need to heal itself? And one of those things that the human body needs is cold exposure. If you don't get cold, you lose your brown fat. When you lose your brown fat, your thyroid becomes dysregulated. Your brain is more vulnerable to injury. Your mitochondria won't work right. And you are at risk for metabolic dysfunction. All of the leading causes of death in the United States from chronic illness have their origins in metabolic dysfunction. So now, Jeffrey, I'm on a mission. I wrote this book, Uncommon Cold. It's bigger than my dissertation. you can find 400 different scientific citations in here. And I'm on social media and I do podcasts like this because every time I turn around, NBC News is saying cold plunge is just a fad and it's not good for you. And I got to keep pushing back against the lies that are keeping people sick.
Amen to that. Yeah, the lockdown story there, man, I'm right there with you. And I would say I questioned a lot of things at the beginning, but I didn't do it from a state of telling people what they should be doing. I just knew in my gut, being outside, getting fresh air, continuing to take care of ourselves is really mattered the most. And, that's probably around the timeline that I really came across a lot of your work, and I've been following you ever since, and really grateful for you having the courage to speak out because sure, Western medicine has its place. There's a time and a place that pharmaceutical drugs can serve a purpose and play a role. I have a tendency to say that Western medicine is best suited for trauma. If I'm in an accident, bring me to the ER. But yeah, for sure, from lifestyle diseases, metabolic problems, and so on, everything you alluded to, that popping a pill isn't the answer, and it's certainly not a result in a deficiency of a pharmaceutical drug. So
Right.
yeah, I'm on a very similar path actually. I've shared with my audience already, but back in June I was diagnosed with a tumor on my kidney, and similar to yourself, I just had this sense. When I got that diagnosis, I felt this rush of energy from my feet all the way up to my head, and it literally culminated in a smile on my face. The energy was just pure peace and calm. And I knew in that moment that I'm going to be okay and that this is an opportunity. I've been blessed with an opportunity to lead by example and show people the capability the human body has of healing itself. And that's the journey I'm on. I'm actually, right now, I'm at, let me think, probably 60 some odd hours into a fast. I got my ice bath in right before we got started. Actually, I can't call it an ice bath. I'll call it a cold plunge. It was 40 degrees. I did 4 minutes at 40 degrees. And then I got my workout in because I know based on your information that testosterone can really skyrocket. And I got it tested at some point earlier in the year. Based on the way that I feel, I would have guessed it was going to be higher, but it was just under 600. And just to be an N of one experiment, I'm going to continue this journey of get in the cold and get my workout in, and we'll get it retested and see just how high it can get. I know yours being north of 1100 is just absolutely remarkable. So yeah, there's all this information is so exciting for me. And the more I can learn and apply and then share with the audience, I'm just really excited to bring somebody such as yourself here. So you already scratched the surface on a lot of it, but if you can, let's go into a little bit deeper the role that we know the cold and then the workout does play in regards to getting that testosterone up.
What you need to know about testosterone is that it is the mitochondria that synthesize the steroidal precursors. So if you have damaged mitochondria, which is typical of metabolic dysfunction. So if your mitochondria aren't really up to snuff, they will not be taking the cholesterol out of your bloodstream and using it to synthesize these steroidal precursors that become testosterone. If your mitochondria aren't right, your testosterone can't be right. And so this is the mechanism by which cold plunge can boost testosterone over the long haul. When you get into the cold, it will activate your brown fat. If you have any brown fat at all, it will activate your brown fat. And then it will recruit new brown fat that is stimulate your body to beige white fat cells, mostly around the base of the neck, a little bit around the heart, but they're positioned where the warmth that they generate will keep the blood that's going to the brain warm. So they add mitochondria to white fat cells. It is nothing better than cold to stimulate these processes called mitophagy, which you're going through right now because you're on a 60-hour fast. And that's the elimination of the damaged mitochondria. And then its converse, mitobiogenesis, the synthesis of new healthy mitochondria. When you're able to upgrade your mitochondria, then they're more capable of producing the testosterone that you need. In men, the vast majority of testosterone is produced in the gonads. And we have, maybe 10 times as much testosterone as a healthy woman might have. But in a woman, only about 25%, maybe as much as a third, is produced in the ovaries. because their testosterone is lower. If you were to pie chart out the sources of it, the skin cells, the fat cells, and the adrenal glands are much more important to a woman's total testosterone. So men and women respond differently. When a woman gets into the cold, she activates those secondary sources of testosterone production. There's nothing better to stimulate your adrenal glands and your skin and your fat cells than a cold plunge, and her testosterone starts going up right away. But men have a different response. Men need to exercise. They need to rewarm after the cold to get that testosterone boost. Now, both exercise and cold plunge are good for the mitochondria. But if you do it the other way, if you exercise first and then cold plunge, the data shows that this reduces your luteinizing hormone. It's luteinizing hormone that stimulates the gonads to produce the testosterone. So you just flip it around. A lot of the critics right now of ice baths are saying doing an ice bath after your exercise, that doesn't help. That's crazy. And they're right. But they're also 3 years behind the times. Like, who the heck does ice baths after exercise anymore? Like, pre-cool your workout. The studies are all there about the benefits you get to maximum power output, about the benefits that you get to postponing fatigue, increased endurance, and about the benefits that you get to the testosterone. So everything that you knew when you were a kid. I don't know, if maybe you were on the track team or football or something, and they're like, okay, now you got to ice up after practice. It's wrong. Do your cold first and then do your exercise. There's so much just in the last 15 years that has changed in our understanding. You go back to 2007, and medical doctors were convinced there was no such thing as brown fat in an adult human being. Rodents have it, but they're like, no, human beings, they outgrow it. And then this Swedish team was looking at all these PET scans. So this is a scan that they use to image tumors. And you have to take a radioactive tracer of glucose. You take that into your body, and then it partitions into the tumor because the tumors run mostly on glucose. They image the radioactivity and they say, there's your tumor. It's a PET scan. Mm-hmm. The Swedish team said, but we're seeing on some of our scans these symmetrical images around the clavicles. They can't possibly be tumors. Tumors aren't symmetrical like that. We think it's brown fat. And sure enough, the Sloan Kettering Institute had somebody go through like 10,000 scans. This is down in New York, and they've been scanning people for decades. And they said about 5% of our adult patients have detectable brown fat. It changed everything. Now you can do a whole dissertation. You can get a doctorate just in brown fat. But the converse means 95% of the people have no detectable brown fat. And that is there can be serious lifelong consequences of that. Brown fat is not just for cold thermogenesis. It also modulates thyroid function. So it's in constant communication with the thyroid. And if you don't have brown fat, your thyroid becomes dysregulated, whether that is hypo or hyper, so under or overactive. It might be Graves' disease. It might be Hashimoto's disease. There are good case studies of people who have resolved what they were told would be a lifelong degenerative thyroid condition and done it with an ice bath. Because when you do daily ice bath, it takes about 2 weeks for the muscle shivering response to subside, for the brown fat to be forming in your body so that you no longer feel the same. You might get the gasp reflex, but you don't get the same shiver response because the brown fat is now doing the non-shivering thermogenesis. Bringing that brown fat back over time will modulate the thyroid function, normalize it so that Dr. Courtney Hunt in Scottsdale, 0 markers of Hashimoto's in her blood anymore. Adrian Jezik, a co-founder at Morozko Forge, same thing. There have been a number of, all of them women, but who have resolved these thyroid disorders with ice baths. And that's not all. Brown fat is also an essential secretory organ. So it will produce and send to your brain things like neuroprotective factors that promote brain healing or protect the brain against injury. FGF21, for example, is associated with higher levels of brown fat. And so cold on a regular basis is also an adjunctive therapy for recovering from brain injury, and it helps enhance cognitive function and either reverse or delay the progression of dementia. If you don't have brown fat, Jeffrey, you are like a walking metabolic time bomb waiting for some chronic illness to manifest and your doctor to say, well, there's really nothing you can do about it, because they don't know that when they went to medical school, there was no class in when to prescribe an ice bath. They were taught, well, brown fat isn't really a thing. And now we know it is.
Thank God, too. And it's also a scenario, right? As we all say, follow the money. There's not a whole lot of money in them prescribing an ice bath, especially if they don't have the tub to sell somebody. If just telling, in some scenarios, and this will be a good transition, I think, just getting cold. So we know that fully submerging into the water, for me personally, is a totally different game than a cold shower or cold air. I've done it all. I'll continue to do it all. But submerging is an absolute different animal. And while I'll say when it's cold enough, of course, I don't look forward to getting in, but I know the benefits that I'm going to get from it. And I know I'm going to be on a high for the rest of the day. It's worth every single time. It's worth it. But there's that aspect that I think I've heard you say this too. A cold shower, while I know there's a benefit, it can make you angry. It's uncomfortable. You don't like doing that. But something about submerging fully it's a different animal. So I guess what I'll say with that regard is maybe unpack the difference between being exposed to cold air, a cold shower, and then full submersion. And, there are benefits with each, right? So maybe we'll unpack each of those.
Research is coming out of Finland. So they have these universities up at the Arctic Circle. One of them is the University of Oulu or something, and I'm probably not even saying this right. And they do a lot of research on what we call in the States thermal contrast therapy. But in Finland, they just call it sauna. Because to them, sauna is not just getting in the hot box. Sauna is going back and forth between the heat and the cold. They have, however many lakes they have in Finland. They have cold air. They have winter. And so there's no such thing as a population of Finns that you can study who have never done cold, because it's just incorporated into their sauna routine. So they do the best work on cold. And there was a paper that compared partial cold water immersion with full body, or at least, head out, whole body cold water immersion. And they found an important difference in the heart rate. When you're doing a cold shower, you get the gasp reflex. You get the activation of the sympathetic division of the central nervous system. You get that fight or flight response. And this really revs you up. This is why the cold showers make me angry. What you don't get is the mammalian dive reflex. The mammalian dive reflex is the parasympathetic response. That's when your body is sort of, you're trained, it's trained by evolution to think that you're going to go dive. You're going to go get the lobsters, or you're going to go, I don't know, spear fishing, whatever you got to do. You're going to be holding your breath. You're going to be underwater for a little while. And this slows down the rate of oxygen consumption. It slows down your heart rate. So we have some really good real-time heart rate data on what happens when you first get in. Boom, there's a blood glucose spike. There's a heart rate spike, the activation of the sympathetic, and you feel it in the gasp reflex. And you're like, I got to get out of here. I'm going to die. But you don't. You structure your breathing, and you sort of tell yourself a story. We're going to be in here a little bit, body. We got a couple of minutes of work here to do. And your body is programmed to make the adjustments that you need to survive. That is improving your vagal function. That is bringing your parasympathetic division online. And we can see this in the improvements in heart rate variability that people who do regular practice of cold plunge experience. your brain responds. It goes down into an involuntary, deep meditative state. We've measured this with the Muse headset, where you get these experienced meditators where they're warm and dry, and they can do a good job of keeping their brain waves in a fairly meditative state. And then we put them in the cold plunge, and boom, brain goes right down into that meditative sort of frequency. And you do it without trying. It is your body's programmed response to the cold, because we are descendant from people who emerged from the Ice Age, who had to be adapted to cold water immersion, or they never would have made it.
Amen. That's interesting. Yeah, I can relate wholeheartedly too. Knowing the benefits that do come from cold, predominantly, I'll say, spring and summer months, I'm getting in the cold shower. In the Northeast, spring, summer, it's warm enough. That tub's not staying cold for me. I've just got my regular tub out there. It doesn't have its own chiller, so I'm still getting cold, but it is not the same thing. And that absolutely explains it, because for sure, in the tub, full submersion, I get into my deep breath work, and you have no choice but to be instantly in that present moment, fully aware of what's going on in that moment. You're not wandering. So the psychological benefits are just astronomical. And
that's the beautiful thing. You cannot be anxious about your future or experience shame and regret about your past when you are like up to your neck in chunks of ice. All those other thoughts, they disappear, and you are snapped back to your present moment. It's one of my favorite things about the ice bath.
100% right. I'm right there with you. It's interesting. I'm at a stage of life now where I've learned sharing my story with somebody in a way to just hopefully get them to make a couple of little changes. I don't want to tell them what they need to do, but I like to highlight my flaws. I've still got plenty of them. I like to be open, honest, and vulnerable, and share the flaws that I made in the past. And I'm so grateful that I've been able to make the changes I have. And because I have, my attitude is everybody's capable. If I am, everybody is. So in sharing my story specifically with the cold exposure, yeah, I'd be the first to say I wasn't looking forward to getting in like you do the sauna or a hot tub. It's not the same experience. It isn't fun to step in there, but man, the benefits are just incredible. And I can't say enough about it. But, you're talking about things like thyroid and those conditions improving. I know so many people in my life that I pray will watch this and pray will receive that message and say, okay, Dr. Seager just said it takes about 14 days, 2 weeks for your body to adapt. So the first couple of days might be a bit of a challenge, but you get there, you expose yourself. I like to say, get comfortable being uncomfortable when you know that the results are going to follow. So I think with that, if we can take that concept of the 2 weeks, and maybe we can talk about some things of some protocols for people to follow, when they're not yet cold adapted and they're in there for 5 seconds and want to jump out, how long do they stay in for? How cold does it need to be? And what is it we're looking at to get started?
It's not quite the right question. I get this one a lot. What's the optimal temperature? What's the optimal time? And I think that question is coming from a pharmaceutical paradigm. Take these pills, take them this often, follow these specific instructions. They're good for everybody. It doesn't make any sense, but except for sort of the factory that makes the pills. There's no such thing as a pharmacy that will, mix your own dose, that will create the dose that's right for you anymore. And I know there are, they're very rare, but now what we have is pharmacies that depends right what comes from the factory and says, well, this is the right thing for everybody. Yeah. That's not the way cold works. And so people say, well, how much should I do? At what temperature? And I say, it depends upon your degree of cold training. People get this with the gym. You don't go to the gym and ask the trainer, what's the optimal amount of weight for everybody to do? And how many reps should they all have? Because the trainer will meet with you and say, okay, what's your level of fitness? What's your level of strength? What's your level of experience? And then design a program that challenges you it's a bit of a stretch. You're going to be working hard and you're not going to be comfortable doing it. And then you will adapt. Cold is the same way. Go cold enough to gasp, go long enough to shiver. When you're just starting, you might have a rule of thumb in fitness where you say, well, choose a weight that you can lift about 8 or 9 times until failure. And this is just a rule of thumb, and that's going to be different for everyone else. The rule of thumb for starting cold exposure, go cold enough to gasp and long enough to shiver. After about 2 weeks, you'll notice that you don't shiver as much. And so some people will say, well, I got to stay in here 5 or 6 minutes now to start shivering. But you don't have to. The reason you're not shivering is because you have recruited brown fat. Your body is becoming better at thermal regulation. You have built up the blood vessels are improving their circulation. They're remodeling so that they can do a better job of vasoconstriction in your limbs to protect yourself from the heat extraction of the cold. And then to restore that with vasodilation when you're rewarming, remodeling the microcirculation in your fingertips and your toes so that your body is adapting to the cold. At that point, I do 2 to 4 minutes, and I do it at like 33, 34 degrees. And that's it. It's sort of, I'm kind of at the tune-up stage. I'm not trying to set any records. I'm not going to go, swim under the ice at the North Pole. If I were Lewis Pugh, I would probably go more extreme because he is one of these record-breaking, world record holders. He can warm up his body with his thoughts. He imagines getting into the cold water, and that's enough to activate his brown fat. I'm just an overweight college professor, and so I get in there, couple of 4 minutes. Sometimes I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and sometimes it's so dang hot, I'll get in there twice a day. But I don't stay for very long unless I'm shooting a video. And sometimes, someone will say something dumb online, and then people will send it to me and they'll say, Professor Seager, you should really respond. And I'm like, okay, I'll have my 6 or 7 points, and I get in there. But Jeffrey, I don't get it right on the first take. And so I did 3 takes, 22 minutes in the cold, right? Because you get into I had something to say. There's only 5 minutes of worthwhile video in this thing, but that was the last time I think I kind of overdid it. 22 at 34.
Ooh.
The only reason you do that, 22 minutes at 34 degrees, the only reason you do that is just show off. Now, sometimes I like showing off, but not every day.
Yeah, that's a bit extreme. It's impressive, and it's remarkable to think that we do have the capability to build up to that. I know I've heard from, I had Dr. Alexis Cowan on, and we were talking about the benefits of at a warmer temperature, 50 to 55 degrees, in doing that periodically for longer periods of time, maybe upwards of 45 minutes, or, again, like you just alluded to, find out where you are. If you're adapted, you can do a little bit longer. But yeah, at 34 degrees to do over 20 minutes, that's a bit much. I don't need to strive for that right now. That's awesome. But actually, that could segue into, I know I've got a lot of friends that I talk to about this, and one dear friend of mine, he thinks about, he's done some cold plunging as well since I've talked to him about it and introduced him to it. But he follows some different influencers, and he gets a little, I'll say, rubbed the wrong way, that so many people just tout, oh, look how long I did and look how cold it was. There's so much ego in it. And I told him admittedly that part of the problem here is he's following the wrong people. But he said very few people are talking about the risks. And there are some inherent risks if you haven't gotten cold adapted yet, if you haven't listened to the right people, and if you're just trying to push through and use your ego. So with that kind of leading it, what would you say ultimately the risks that people need to be concerned about,
There is a lot of bad advice on Wikipedia about this.
Mm-hmm.
We know that your heart rate is going to change when you get into the cold. Your heart rate will go up, your heart rate will go down. And so people say, oh my gosh, that's a heart arrhythmia. That's got to be dangerous. No, there's a difference between a physiological response, like a healthy adaptive response, and a pathological response. Just because your heart rate is changing as it is supposed to doesn't mean your heart is at risk. The number one contraindication for cold plunge, it's hypertension, it's high blood pressure, It's not, a heart issue.
Hmm.
The high blood pressure comes from the vasoconstriction. When you do the whole body immersion, vasoconstriction will shut down the circulation to your limbs, and it will bring the blood into your core. And of course, your head is out of the water, so into your head. This increases your blood pressure. If you already suffer from chronic hypertension, then you could have an acute episode of
Hmm.
elevated blood pressure when you're in the cold. This has been reported to me by two different medical professionals who have supervised it. Now, the people recovered fine, but it's not something, I mean, it's very scary, and it's not something you want to go through. So if you're getting your information on the risks from Wikipedia instead of Morosco, you're poorly informed. The good thing is that over the long term, cold plunge is great for your circulatory system. Sauna, thermal contrast therapy will improve your circulation and reduce your blood pressure. If you do have high blood pressure, start slower. What do I mean? Start warmer.
Hmm.
Now, for me, it's not a problem. The psychological benefits for me really kick in at the cold temperatures where I see the ice floating around. I'm at a point where I'm not really in there for the metabolic benefits. If it's 39 or 40, I get bored. But if
Hmm.
it's 33, then I experience that anticipatory anxiety. Then I can feel, what Joe Rogan calls his inner bitch trying to talk me out of it. I could probably skip a day. But there's also a lot of exaggeration about hypothermia. So this would be the reduction of the core body temperature.
Hmm.
Even at 34 degrees, it would probably take more than half an hour, 45 minutes to get my core body temperature down to a point where people would say, yep, that's hypothermic. And the dangers of hypothermia are also exaggerated. Hyper, that is staying in the sauna too long, is
Hmm.
more dangerous than staying in the ice bath too long. But I don't mean to say that to encourage people to do super marathon sessions in the ice bath.
Sure.
2 to 4 minutes. Now, every once in a while, I can understand why a guy would want to challenge himself and, see what he can do, especially if he's trying to impress a girl. So I've, had an experience that was kind of like that. I did 14 minutes. It was too much. I got out. I was supposed to go to hot yoga, and I couldn't drive. I couldn't, operate my phone. I couldn't do anything. I needed to re-warm. And so by the time I got to hot yoga, I was like a little late, and I had to kind of sneak in, and I'm on my mat doing like the half monkey twist pose, or, whatever these things are. And I wasn't getting it right. So the instructor came over, and she's like, well, no, you got to have, she corrected my posture. At the end of class, she came up to me afterwards, and I said, yeah, thanks for that. It was a big help. Thanks for letting me in late. I know that's disruptive. And she said, no problem. That's what we do here. But I have a question. She said, was it hot enough for you? And I said, well, yeah. I mean, it was like, what, 115 or something? 100? I don't know. Heart rate went up and everything. She goes, no. When I put my hand on your back, your skin felt cold. And I thought, geez, I better crank up the heat in this room. When you do too much, your body will let you know. You will experience brain fog. You will lose not only fine motor control, but you will lose proprioception. You will lose like large limb motor control. At
Hmm.
that point, wrap yourself up in a blanket. Get in the car, turn on the heat, if you don't have a sauna. Give yourself 45 minutes or an hour to let your body re-warm before you decide to do anything drastic, like, monkey moon, whatever the heck it was, thing that I was trying.
Oh, that's great. And, hopefully anyone listening to this is paying attention enough to not really test those limits, but that is great, great feedback, great to know. And, there is a time where if you do push it a little too far, make sure you give your body an opportunity to warm up. And, the exercise after is a great way, but sometimes if you go too far, just use some sort of device, a heating device to get you to warm up.
It's
Uh, you know,
fine.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. Again, remove the ego from it, right? Now, you mentioned too the information. So Wikipedia, not a great source. Morosco, wonderful source. The three primary areas I've gotten most of my information about my cold plunging, cold thermogenesis of any sort has been Wim Hof, Susanna Soberg, and yourself. And actually, I'd add to that just recently, really digging deep into a lot of Dr. Jack Krus's work. He definitely references some cold thermogenesis as well. So I've dug into some of his work as well. But with that in mind, I heard you speak on the breath work, the hyperventilating type of breath work that Wim teaches, and how while I've been through his training, I went to a wonderful seminar about it, and the breath work was incredible. This whole mindset element of it, they've got the three pillars: the mindset, the breath work, and the cold. But we do not want to be doing that breath work while we're in the water. And I heard your explanation on that. It was wonderful. I'll let you go into that here as well so the audience has a good understanding of it.
Vim is now very explicit about this in everything that he posts online. Do not hyperventilate in the water. There's something called shallow water blackout. Free divers used to hyperventilate so they could hold their breath longer underwater. And free diving is one of the most dangerous things that human beings can do in the water. So the idea of combining the hyperventilation with the water is that you deplete the levels of CO2 when you hyperventilate.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a lack of oxygen that gives you the urge to breathe. It's the buildup of CO2 in your bloodstream. So if you hyperventilate and your CO2 is low, yes, you can hold your breath for longer, but you also run the risk of passing out before you feel that urge to breathe. That's the shallow water blackout, not deep water. You lose consciousness and you drown because you no longer can hold your head above water. You can no longer get yourself out of the bath or the river or the whatever it is. Hyperventilation and water don't belong anywhere near one another under any circumstances. When you get into the cold, breathe. Structure your breathing, not hyper breathe, but just breathe. Box breathing is a good one. I'll count. I read James Nestor's book on breath, and he had some good suggestions. Sometimes I think about that. Even when I go down for a head dunk, I will exhale just slowly through my nose because I don't want to stop breathing altogether. And I will also be explicit. When you're doing Wim Hof breath work, make sure that you separate your cold plunge from your breath work.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, you talk about the gasp reflex, and it's interesting because when I went through the training, the gentleman that ran it was phenomenal. I've actually had him on the podcast before as well. He taught us to get into that cold on your exhale so that it's not taking your breath away. So you stay in control. Now, are you still getting the physiological benefit that you allude to of the gasp reflex just simply because it's so cold, or should you actually allow for that and let it take it away?
I think that's a wonderful idea to be exhaling while you're going in. I tried a different thing this morning. This is the first time brushing my teeth while I'm doing my ice bath. And it wasn't because I had this scientific interest in, the exhale or the inhale and the gasp reflex. It's like, oh my gosh, I got a podcast. I got to get this going. And so, I got my toothbrush, which is set. It's an electric toothbrush set for 2 minutes. I'm like, all right, I'm going to stack these, right? And it was harder. It is harder to like mouth tape and do the ice bath because you have that urge to gasp that you have to overcome. This idea of like, okay, I'm going to get in on the exhale. That sounds really clever. I don't see any reason, and I could be wrong. Maybe we should wire up the brain and see what the brain waves are doing, but I don't see any reason that you would lose the benefit of sympathetic nervous system activation. Everything that I've done with whether it's the mouth tape or brushing my teeth while I'm in the cold, none of that has alleviated the sympathetic nervous system response. It's not like I'm, exhaling or I'm toothbrushing going, oh, this is great. It's the same. What am I thinking?
Yep. Yeah, every time, right? You getting in,
Yep.
and I do. I utilize that. I get in, I get that exhale going, and it's a game changer. I'll be honest. And then what I do is I slow my breathing down to a point that I'll count my breaths, and then I'll glance at the stopwatch. And generally speaking, I'll get 12 to 15 breaths in, and that's about my 3 minute mark. So it's a real slow, deliberate breath, and being so present because that cold just it makes you again, as you said before, you're not thinking about the future. You're not thinking about the past. You're thinking about right here, right now, surviving this. And then when you get out, you feel like $1,000,000. And I'll do a little
Yeah.
bit of grounding. I go walk in the backyard when I get out and get my workout in. So it's incredible.
Good. I was going to mention this because in your Rubbermaid tub,
Yeah.
you're missing the grounding. And
Yes.
Alexis Cowan is really good about explaining this.
Yep.
We have a stainless steel tub in the Morosco. It is attached to ground. So when you plug it into your 3-prong outlet, it goes straight into your house's grounding system, and it feels different.
Mhm.
People don't know how to describe the difference, but when you get, and it's instantaneous, it's 30 times more effective than walking barefoot in the grass. So
Wow.
what you could do in half an hour barefoot in your backyard, 1 minute in the forge will do it. Talk about your circulation benefits. When you discharge that electrical imbalance, you change the viscosity of your blood. The red blood cells, they don't coagulate. They're not attracted to one another at the same level because the charge around the cells has been altered. Now
Mm.
they flow more freely through your body. The rate of strokes, of cardiovascular incidents of any kind goes down when you're grounded. But it's more than that. It's the mental benefits too. We use this grounding as a metaphor. We talk about, oh, he's really well grounded,
Mm.
um, and quite literally, more than a metaphor of sort of psychological resilience, grounding your body electrically helps you with that psychological state of feeling like you know who you are and having the
Mm.
confidence to be able to do whatever it is you're going to take on in your life.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I've really taken on this whole movement. I'll share. I've shared some of this with my audience already, but I'll share it with you, and they'll hear it again. But since my diagnosis, especially, I've made some more changes. But even prior to that, I mean, my lifestyle is so different now than what it was before. So that as I reflect back on the diagnosis, I have this strange sense that it wasn't mine. That diagnosis was for a previous version of me that's no longer here. He's already died, and I've already made so many dramatic changes, and grounding is a big piece of that. The cold thermogenesis is a big piece of that. The fasting, the ketogenic diet, and or carnivore, getting in sync with the circadian rhythm, all these different things I'm doing that I just know it's giving my body at the most basic level the stimulus that it needs to repair itself. And it really is, you just said it, that grounding, that the feeling you have when you feel grounded in that sense, like I'm grounded in who I am and I'm on my authentic path. And I think this diagnosis was it was a gift. This is an opportunity to make sure I'm on my path and guiding people in the right way. And I think it played a role with honestly giving me the courage to ask people such as yourself to come on here and have these conversations. And I'm really grateful for all of it. And I think that's why I love the title of my podcast as well with that acronym. I'm a conduit. I'm not pretending to be the expert. I'm having the experts on and I'm asking questions. And yeah, that's interesting. Dr. Alexis did talk to us quite a bit when I had her on about the benefits of the grounding in the Morosco. That's something pretty fantastic. I'll look forward to getting mine in the future for sure. And
Let's
now
talk
I
more
guess,
about that tumor, because it takes courage to go against the advice of the centralized medical establishment. I'm going to talk about my own experience, and then I'm going to ask you a little bit more about yours. I
sure.
didn't tell anybody except one closest confidant about my PSA readings. Um, I mean, I told the friends that I was asking about prostate, but I did not tell my daughter. I didn't tell my son. I didn't tell my wife from whom I was separated. I didn't tell my family members because I knew they would say, but Dad, we love you. We care about you. please go have a prostate exam. Please have the biopsy. It's the right thing to do. And we don't want you to take any chances. So I kept it to myself, because it's not only that you have to sort of go against your doctor's advice. And here's your doctor scaring you with all these scenarios of this, that you should really do chemo. And you could say, well, will chemo cure me? No, but you should do it. It's the standard of care. And if you don't do chemo, then you're not really trying. They combine fear and shame to keep you within the clutches of the system. And it takes courage to stand up to your doctor and say, that doesn't sound right for me. What alternatives do you have? And the doctor will say, I don't have any alternatives. This is what we do. I do this for every single person who comes in, no matter what. You say, well, I guess I got to find my own way. That by itself is a courageous conversation. But some of the men I've talked to about prostate, they aren't, even though they admire and they like hearing my story, they're not ready for it. They say, my wife would never let me do that. Oh, I couldn't let my kids down. Or whatever it is that has nothing to do with them and their doctor. They feel like they must comply for the sake of the ones who love them. And I get it. So I'm not saying that they're doing it wrong. I'm saying it is an act of courage to tell people, I don't think that's right for me. And ask them to respect your decision to live your life and experiment with your body on your terms and still love you anyway, even though they might be going through their own grief, and some sort of emotionally selfish part of them is like, no, I want you to do these things so I feel better, which is a very difficult thing to confront somebody with, but they sort of get wrapped up. They're experiencing fear and anxiety through you, and sometimes forget that you're the one with the tumor. So what can you do? There's a woman I've been dating for almost 8 years, AJK writer. You can find her on Twitter, and she's written a little bit about this. She called me when I was in Texas. This was before COVID. And she said, I'm in acute pain. Well, I want you to get to the hospital. She said, oh, I'm not sure. Maybe it's just a cyst or something, but it feels worse. She got to the hospital and I got a plane. By the time I got back to Phoenix, she was in the emergency room. They won't tell me what it is. Well, they wouldn't tell her because she had a tumor on her liver that came out of nowhere. It was 4 centimeters wide. They can't operate on the liver because it's nothing but, blood vessels. And she had a history of a bleeding disorder. She might have just died on the table bleeding out. It's not the kind of tumor that would respond to radiation or chemotherapy. So they sent it all the way up to the tumor board instead of telling her what was going on. When the physician finally came down and said, well, this, you got a tumor and this is the image and the tumor board and this and that and the other. She says, what do I do? And they said, watchful waiting. Jeffrey, what the hell is watchful waiting? If you have a 4 centimeter tumor on a vital organ that came out of nowhere, what are you going to do? Sit around and watch it? Because that doesn't go away just by itself. She's got 4 daughters, and of course she's scared out of her mind. So she says, Tom, what am I going to do? I said, you're going to do what I did. You're going to do what Dean Hall did, because when he thought he was going to die, he wanted to inspire other terminally ill cancer patients by doing something great. He swam the entire length of the Willamette River in Oregon. It's 187 miles. It took him 3 weeks to do it. And that river is cold. When he went in, he was a leukemia patient. And when he came out, he was cured. No markers of leukemia anywhere in his bloodstream. And he'd be a good podcast guest for you too. So I told AJ, you're going to do what we've done. You're going to go keto. You're going to get in the cold. You're going to watch it, but you're not just going to wait. So she did. 6 months later, she went back for another scan. And that dang thing had shrunk from 4 centimeters down to 2.5. She did it metabolically, not because there were no other alternatives. So really, what did she have to lose? And then they locked her out of the hospital because they said, oh, well, COVID. and they banned all elective procedures. But what people don't understand is elective is anything that can be scheduled. Like, you wouldn't think of the liver scan for a tumor as elective or optional or something, but it was, and it was prohibited. So she wrote an article, and it was called "The COVID Lockdowns Are Killing More People Than COVID." She had already been censored. She wrote an article called "The Curve is Already Flat," saying COVID was in community spread. It had been there. It's all in the CDC influenza-like illness reports in November of 2019. These lockdowns are pointless. She was the second person ever censored for her anti-lockdown views, because that thing went like 2 million views in 24 hours, and then Medium shut it down. She wrote another one. "The COVID lockdowns are killing more people than COVID." I sent it to Governor Doug Ducey. He was governor of Arizona at the time. He lifted the ban on elective procedures that afternoon. So what are we talking about? The institutionalized medicine, these policies that are set at the federal level, and the institutions, the hospitals and the universities that carry out these policies, they're not there for you. They're there for themselves. They're there to create sick people who are a constant stream of revenue. And yet, if you step out of line so much as to say, you know what, I'm going to try some keto. I've read a couple of articles that say it helps, it won't do any harm. I'm going to try some ice bath. I can do 2 minutes of discomfort. And I've read all these good things on, Professor Seager's blog and in his book about the mice in Sweden who were bred to die of cancer, right? These are laboratory mice. And when they used acute cold exposure, not chronic, but just periodic cold air exposure, the mice in the experimental cold exposed group, their tumors grew more slowly and they lived longer. And the mechanism was activation of brown fat to starve the tumor cells of glucose. You say, I read about that. I'm going to give this a shot, and I'll get a new image, and I'll see what happens to my tumor. You'd think that, I don't know, that you just insulted the queen or something. I'm making this up, right? But that's now a real crime in Great Britain. You can go to prison for what you post on social media if it's unflattering of the royal family.
Yeah.
You'd think that you committed some egregious moral offense, the way all of these social systems are organized to discourage you from thinking for yourself about your own health. And so I applaud what you're doing, Jeffrey, talking about it, saying to people, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm saying this is what worked for me. And you can do with my experience whatever you like for yourself. There's no judgment in this. Okay, maybe a little bit of judgment sometimes. But when you say this is the situation I was in, this is what worked for me, this is what didn't work, it's the only advice worth giving or considering.
100%. Everything you're talking about there goes in line with what I've been calling lately this shift that I see. We're going from what you just described that I call the disempowerment paradigm. These people in positions of authority and power taking that power from we the people through fear, through low vibrational frequencies. And I just knew there's something in me. It wasn't like I wanted to push back and fight. As I said, I literally felt a rush of energy from my feet through my entire body that was just pure peace and calm. And I knew in that moment, I know what I need to do. All these years of studying and just being, I like to tap into my inner geek, and I'm listening to different documentaries, and I'm hearing of all these people who have healed themselves from far worse things than, it's a large tumor. It's about 80% of the left kidney. It's a large, it's substantial. So I'm not minimizing what I have that I'm working through, but people have recovered from far worse. The story Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani. I mean, what a phenomenal story, and hearing about what she went through and how she recovered. And the list goes on, right? And many of these people are oncologists themselves who, when they get their diagnosis, they know I'm not going through standard of care. I'm doing this approach, which, whether it was some people doing juicing, some people doing fasting, cold, whatever it may have been, just going a different route. So as you talked about with the difficulty of sharing it with family, I had zero difficulty because it was from a place of, I have an understanding. This isn't just pushing back. This isn't just being difficult. This is, I feel I understand this and I understand my body in such a way that I know what it needs and I'm giving it to it. And I'm embracing this concept of getting comfortable, being uncomfortable. So, at this point, I've done so many different prolonged fasts that this current one I'm in, I'm not even hungry right now. And I know these benefits that come from something like a fast, from something like, the cold thermogenesis, learning through Dr. Cruz's work and Dr. Cowan's work and in this whole movement of quantum biology, learning about the benefits of melatonin production and how this time of year the sun sets so much earlier, tapping into that darkness in addition to having already tapped into the sun and letting my body get into the sync with that circadian rhythm. And now, I'm literally going to bed, and not because I feel sick and tired, but because I intellectually understand the benefits of saying, hey, you know what? It's dark out. Shut all the lights off, keep the blue light blocking glasses on, and then it's time to get to bed and maximize my sleep. So all these different things. Tomorrow morning, I go in for my next scan, and my birthday is a week from this coming Saturday, December 7th. And I anticipate, we don't have the scheduled appointment yet for my follow-up to the scan results, but I was sharing with a friend the other day that was reaching out and just checking in. He's like, hey, thinking about you, always am, praying for you, but I don't want to be a pest. So I shared that story with him, and I said, I don't know when the follow-up is, but one heck of a birthday present would be getting that follow-up scan result right before my birthday and seeing just how much it has shrunk, because I've seen that in my mind's eye in my meditations, and I just know that's the trajectory that's coming. So going into the scan and a nice long fast, I think I did the math. By the time I get there tomorrow, I'm going to be at about 88, 89 hours, and I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, you got me talking a little bit more about myself than I had anticipated today, but I appreciate it. And
I wanted to know. Yeah.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's been really special having the conversations with my loved ones, with my friends, that, the common theme when they sit down with me, they say, listen, I don't understand it the way that you do. If you're comfortable with it, please explain it to me. And I do, and I tap into the things like the mindset and just energetically. Kidney tumors especially, we have this understanding that they're very slow growing tumors. So the size of this particular tumor could indicate that it quite literally could have been around for 30 years. So that brings me back to about 13 years old. And at that time, I was a super emotional person, super sensitive person that never learned how to deal with that. So what I may feel internally as a level of sadness would manifest as anger. And we know anger as an emotion has all sorts of detrimental impacts on the body at a cellular level. So as I look back and I take ownership of the role I played in this journey, I know I created an environment in my body back then that was absolutely conducive to allowing a tumor to grow. I also didn't eat well. I started drinking alcohol at far too young of an age, far too long, staying up late. Just, I abused myself. And I'm so fortunate that this is all I got from that, and that's why I said before that I feel this diagnosis is from that life, and that life doesn't exist anymore. The life that I'm living now is the life that is healing it. And as I explain these things to people, they just sit there and say, I sense in your explanation and in your energy as you're telling me about this that you're going to do it. Like there's no doubt, there's no fear, there's no worry, and there truly isn't. And I'm very grateful for this opportunity, because I feel my path of empowerment for myself has led me to this point, and empowering myself will allow me to empower others. And I think that's my purpose in my time here.
It may as well be. What are your other choices?
Amen. Amen. And I'll add to that real quick too. You said a lot of people, there's that fear element that a lot of people feel they have to follow standard of care for their loved ones. I actually have the complete opposite sense. I have to follow my gut, my intuitive sense that my body is going to be able to heal itself, not going that path.
I
And I
agree.
have to do that for my loved ones to lead by example and
Yep.
do so without that fear, and
This is somewhat counterintuitive. Taleb writes about this. We should applaud the risk takers. We should celebrate the people, even when they fail, who are discovering the new things. In our area, the bodybuilders, on Venice Beach in California in the 70s, who were taking all the steroids so you didn't have to. That's one way to think about it. They're way ahead of medicine because they're experimenting on themselves. They're trading knowledge with one another. The next thing the Jose Canseco and Mark McGuire are all jacked up.
Yep.
And they know how to do it because the ones that came before them are the ones who suffered the adverse consequences and figured out how to get it right. It is the job of the artist, or to some extent the journalist, to live those experiences that other people wouldn't dare to have for themselves, and then to interpret them and bring them to the rest of the society so that they're taking the risks that other people only want to live vicariously through.
Mhm.
If you were to do the standard of care, no matter how it works out, we learn nothing. If you take this more courageous approach, then who suffers if it turns out to be wrong? You. And who benefits? Everyone who is willing to learn. And if it works, then it could be that lots of people benefit. The guy who solved ulcers, he's a famous story. Nobody believed him when he said, "Oh, ulcers are an infection. They're caused by bacteria." And he couldn't get his papers published. So he said, "Well, I'll prove it to you." He drank the bacteria. He gave himself an ulcer. And then
Yep.
he drank antibiotics to cure himself of the ulcer. Just to prove this point to the world, he made himself the N=1 experiment. And then people started to listen. Ulcers aren't a thing anymore because we know what causes them and we know how to treat it. And he put himself on the line for the benefit of other people. We should celebrate the risk takers. And too often we shame them as if we were in school and you got a D on your exam or something, and so that makes you stupid. You can't go up to the teacher and say, "Oh, I just wanted to try a few different answers."
So true. So true. Yeah, I mean, that plays right into this whole movement of decentralized medicine. Those of us who are willing to say, "Hey, listen, I understand you're not doing the studies and you can justify why you're not doing them. That's okay. I'll do it. I'll do my N=1 and I'll share it." And God bless the technology that allows us to do all the podcasting and have these conversations and share it with the masses. And I know that my story, even though I know in my heart I'm going to be successful, I trust my body's ability to heal. And I really look forward to, coming on here and talking more about it as I get my scans and it continues to shrink. But some people will still have that element of fear. I just pray that sharing my story will give them some sense of hope and hopefully encourage them to make the changes necessary now before they ever get a diagnosis. Because I'll tell you, that's the other thing that gave me such a level of confidence in this. When you look at the list, the things they tell you to do when you're diagnosed with a kidney tumor, I said, I'm already doing all of that and then some. What are you going to get me to change? My metabolic health is fantastic. I don't drink alcohol anymore. January will be 2 years that I haven't had alcohol. Just certain little things that they all add up. Many, many, many little things start to give the body the stimulus it needs to optimize. And I think that's what we're here for. It isn't about indulgence. It isn't about, making life as easy as possible. It's be willing to take on those challenges and, get difficult, get comfortable being uncomfortable, to do those difficult things and get better at it.
I saw a great quote from Thomas Seyfried. He was doing a podcast, so it was a clip. He's at Boston College, and he's
Yep.
probably the foremost advocate of the metabolic theory of cancer. He said, cancer cells are always on the edge of death. I mean, we get the wrong idea because they proliferate and they grow out of control, right? But they're so metabolically dysfunctional. He goes, actually, cancer cells are quite fragile. They
Hmm.
are only thriving under a certain set of conditions that you've created for them, right? But if they can only metabolize glucose and glutamine through fermentation, they're energetically inefficient. They're the most fragile cells in the body. And so
Hmm.
this is why he's like, why can't we go get them? And I thought he made a point that I hadn't heard of before, because we mythologize cancer as if it were this sort of all powerful, uncontrollable force within the body. It's hard to say, well, no, we created it. It exists within us. All the other systems of the body are creating the conditions that in some way support it and allow it to proliferate. And it is something that we can control within ourselves to a greater extent than the National Cancer Institute or the NIH or centralized medicine wants us to believe.
Absolutely. I've taken such a different approach than that of the norm, that I take the concept of that which we resist persists. And you think about, we've got this war on cancer, and God, what was that, 1971 that started, right? And
That
how
was
much
Richard
stronger it's
Nixon,
gotten
man.
since. That's, yep.
Yep.
And
We
it's,
had the war on poverty. We had the war in Vietnam. I think all the other war metaphors were just to distract people from all the money they were spending on Vietnam. I'm
yeah,
so sick of war. I'm sick of
yeah,
war as a metaphor. I'm sick of war literally. It's
yes,
the
sir.
wrong metaphor to use for healing.
Amen. And it's you took the words out of my mouth, because I had a meditation. I've done this multiple times now, but I went in my body and I spoke to the tumor, and I'm using love, and I thanked it. I know it's here to teach me a lesson. And I told it, I learned the lesson loud and clear, and it's time for it to go. And
Yep.
there's no anger at it. There's no animosity towards it. There's no hatred of it. I don't hate it. I created it. I played an active role, not knowingly, certainly. I was a child and through my teens and 20s and so on. But that lifestyle that I led created the environment in my body that made it conducive for that to exist. And I am doing that no longer. And I'm genuinely expressing love and care for it, that, hey, I learned the lesson. Thanks for coming along. And now you can leave. And now it's time to go.
I'm convinced you're doing it the right way. I learned something about this from my daughter. During the lockdown, she got really into Krav Maga. And so she became like a level 3 Krav Maga instructor, because, what else was she going to do? And she's sparring with her friends who are all black belts or whatever, higher level. I forget how it works. And something happened with her knee. Her knee gave out. She hit the mat. Her friends were so apologetic. Like maybe they thought they were a little too tough on her because they were more advanced or something. And they were going to say, oh, are you okay? But she leaned over and she started kissing her knee and saying, it's okay, knee. It'll be fine. You're still on the team. And her friends were surprised. Said, what are you talking about? A lot of athletes will get angry at the body part that is letting them down. They're like, damn it, ankle. If it weren't for you, we'd still be on the field. Or, no. Put a shot in my shoulder. I can keep going. I'm going to, and it makes sense. I can understand why all of that emotion can motivate them to compete. But she told me this story. I said, like, well, that's wonderful. You're going to send the knee all that healing energy. Where did you come up with this? And she said, Dad, I talked to my knee like you would talk to me when you were coaching me in
Wow.
softball. And I'm like, how that makes so much sense. Treat your kidney like it was your child. Speak to your kidney from love and give it reassurance and tell it the whole rest of the body is here for it. We know you're working on something. Keep that up. There's a spot for you on the team, kidney. We're not going anywhere. We're going to be here when you're ready. How can that not help your kidney heal? I'm convinced you're doing it the right way.
That's beautiful. Yeah, you got me moved. And On another level, there's something absolutely special there in your relationship with your daughter for her to have gotten that message. The things that we do as parents that we don't realize how our kids are going to, apply that in their life. That's so special. That's so beautiful. And yes, sir, that's exactly my mindset towards my body. And again, it's one of those things. It's strange for me to talk about myself in this capacity because it's not about me. I'm comfortable talking about it now because I want to share this story to empower other people to do something similar. And when I was younger, I had a desire for, I think maybe as many kids do, for whether it was fortune, fame, spotlight on me, whatever that may be. And it was all out of ego. It was all because I felt so little. I felt so insecure. I wanted to have this, attention. And now I don't want it for any of those reasons. I want it because I believe I've got life experience worthy of sharing with people to help it make their life better. And because of that, I'm now comfortable sitting here talking to you and putting this out there, knowing God knows how many people are going to see it, and
I'm glad you're doing it.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm so grateful that we had this opportunity to chat. And my favorite part about these long form conversations is you don't script it. You have no idea where it's going. And the number of times that I've been moved to tears having these conversations, I'm grateful for it, man. I know you've spoken with Logan Duvall of Sowing Prosperity, and he and I had a wonderful conversation, did the same thing, got me moved. And, you mentioned it earlier on in the conversation specifically about your PSA and men talking. I don't think men talk, period, enough.
Nowhere near enough.
Right. And it's uplifting, it's empowering. There's just something special that we can share with one another when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and to share it. I've shared this a few different times now, but I have these four kind of principles that I let direct me. And it starts with authenticity, goes to humility, goes to vulnerability, and then adaptability. And I have to be able to work through each of those. And the more I do those and the more I share those with people, and, certainly I'll speak with women as well about it, of course, but there's just something about speaking to men about these things from that place of vulnerability that allows them to do the same and drop their guard and drop their ego and realize, damn, I have to work on that too. Thank you so much for sharing that to me. There's something special here. I'm really grateful to be a part of this.
Thanks for having me on.
Truly my pleasure. This was, in fact, I'll say this too. I look forward down the road to having you back, and I can tell you about my new scans and the tumor being gone. And we'll at that point, maybe we can talk a little bit about the green light therapy you're doing some work on as well, because I'm very intrigued by that. But all that being said, thank you so much. And where can oh, yes, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Well,
It's
we'll certainly spend some
migraine
time
pain for the most part. Yep.
Say it again. Monitoring pain.
Migraine pain. Yeah.
Oh,
it is amazing the way migraine pain will respond to green light through the eyes. I mean, you wouldn't think, but that's another podcast. You can go to mygreenlamp.com. You can read the articles that I have there. I barely have any time for it, but I've got these devices and I make them available. People can buy them there, and I get great reports from the people using them.
That's wonderful. I love it. I'll certainly make sure people head over there. And where else can people go to find you and follow along with all your work?
MorozcoForge.com. Everything that I write is available for free. You go to the science tab and all the articles are there. If you're a hard copy kind of person, you can buy the Uncommon Cold book at Morozco. It's not on Amazon. And people ask me why, because I just haven't taken the time to figure out Amazon, Kindle Direct. But I mean, we'll get there eventually. For right now, it's all for free anyway. You just have to take the time to scroll through. Now, I'm a professor. I like writing in the books. And so I had it printed up so I could really write in it. It was a good exercise for me. And since then, we sold like 500 copies. It's amazing, the curiosity, the real need that people have to cut through the crap that is on Instagram or Twitter or whatever and say, I want this explained to me by someone that I can trust in a way that I can evaluate for myself. And so in that way, I think the book has been really helpful.
That's fantastic. I'll certainly be getting myself a copy too. I like having the tangible book in hand.
Yeah.
I'll do some Audible and such from time to time, but I love having the book in hand. So I look forward to that.
And they
And
can't delete it off of your phone without letting you know. So
amen to
maybe
that.
that's a good idea too.
It's funny you say that. Over these past, I'll say since COVID especially, but it started before there, my biggest investment has been into this thing and just reading, absorbing more podcasts and all these different things. And my library is obnoxious. My wife looks at it and she's like, is it time to get rid of any of those? No, I'm going to keep adding to it because I always want to have them. I might lend them out, but I'm not getting rid of them because exactly right. There's no taking those away from me. And it's up here and you can reread a book a second time, a third time, and you grasp more information. You're more capable at that point in the future to take on more from it. So it's been pretty special. And I've actually got I got a couple of books out there myself through COVID. Doing my meditations, I started to journal after my meditations, and I recognized that I was writing some poetry. So I've got 3 books that I call my collections of meditative poetry, and mine are on Amazon, just to throw it out there. Surprisingly, it wasn't all that hard, but mine are.
I guess I'm going to have to figure it out.
Yeah. We'll get there eventually, but at Morosco, we'll find it and we'll do our thing. And listeners, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, like, comment, share, all that good stuff, and certainly follow Dr. Seager as well because he's got some incredible information out there. And till next time, be well, everyone.